Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host of my new podcast, Pause and Rewind. I'll be chatting to changemakers, thought leaders, and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now. But how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now. Because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes, and what makes our guests tick. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there, and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. Did you know that Pause and Rewind is going live? Yep, that's right. On the 16th of April, we'll be having a live recording of the podcast at the Common Press in Shoreditch, everyone's favourite queer and intersectional bookshop in London. It is a truly magical place, and I'll be joined by special guest Shah Bailey, someone who I absolutely love, and she is loved by so many people. It's going to be a great conversation. Tickets are available from the link in my bio on Instagram. Head on over to it to get yours. It's Neil Hudson-Basing, and all ticket fees will go towards the Common Press's crowdfunder. So, on to this episode. This episode is going out slightly early. It's going out on Monday, the 31st of March, which is also Trans Visibility Day. I chose this day to put this podcast out because I'm chatting to an incredible transhuman, but not just a transhuman, an incredible human all round who I happen to know and get the privilege of working with, and that's Burke-Stowe. Trans Visibility Day was set up in 2010 to combat the constant the domination of media stories being focused on transgender violence. And actually, something that this podcast aims to do, something that so many other people aim to do, is shine a spotlight on incredible transhumans, trans stories, trans impact, and move away this thinking from the trans and non-binary community being constant stats, headlines, challenges and barriers, through to joy, through to the impact, through to excellence. And Gray is someone who I really, really admire and respect. Gray is the lead researcher for Trans History Week. We get to work together on that. They're responsible for producing the workbook, which have got phenomenal lessons, encouraging people to go off and organise their own activities and events for Trans History Week. I worked with Gray last year for year one of Trans History Week, and we're gearing up for year two. So we're seeing a lot of each other, but I was really grateful that we got to make some time to record this episode and dive into Gray's origin story. So let me know what you think. Hope you enjoy it. Just to pop a little trigger warning on there, we do cover some challenging topics. We talk about conversion therapy, addiction and recovery, an abusive and coercive relationship that Gray endured. But there's also, as always, so much joy in this episode, and that's something that Gray is particularly speaks to, is the joy that they experience right now. So here's the episode. Cheers. Hey Gray, welcome to Pause and Rewind. It is brilliant having you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I always start with this big question, and that's, what does the world look like for Gray Burke-Stowe right now?
Well, right now, as in this immediate moment, it is my birthday. So I've taken the day
Hey.
off work because I am a child and I refuse to work on my birthday. And yeah, my kids have just made me a cake. We're gonna have a great time. So um, larger than in the exact moment. We're kicking off a lot of Trans History Week stuff, like you had mentioned. We've just had recently our workbook launch with an inclusivity building webinar with We Create Space, which was wonderful. And yeah, we're getting a bunch of stuff in order for the actual week to come around in May.
It is so exciting, but firstly, happy birthday. I'm
Thank
all
you.
about that child energy of kind of like really celebrating. I love celebrating other people's. I'm not so big around celebrating my own, but absolutely love celebrating other people's birthdays and always here for cake.
Always, always.
What cake was it?
It is a chocolate cake with a strawberry buttercream.
Oh my gosh.
I'm usually the cake maker in the family, so the kids actually have gotten really excited recently on being able to contribute to a cake for me. I think they've started, putting together that I do that as a labor of love, and they're actually giving back in that case, which is a wonderful present.
That's gorgeous. Have you got any other nice plans?
Going out for dinner. That's about it.
Nice, nice. Well, happy birthday.
Thank
I hope
you.
that you have a wonderful day. And I'm really excited that you're joining me for a conversation to focus on your origin story on your birthday. It feels kind
Yeah,
of,
it brings back some of those thoughts of, oh, that birthday was like this, and
oh, well, we will have a great conversation. And yes, Trans History Week Year 2. I mean, we had a phenomenal launch last year for Year 1. I'm not sure that any of us on the team expected it to be quite as big as it is. Year 2 is looking equally exciting.
I think it's looking better even. Last year we were so surprised. We weren't sure how it was going to happen actually until we got to the day. We had put all this work and energy into it. You included, you were helping with the events and, I couldn't throw an event if my life depended on it. And we got there and on the first day of Trans History Week, suddenly social media was just like full of hashtags and trans flags. And it was just such a beautiful thing to see our hard work actually come to fruition like that. It was really amazing.
It was, and yet we all bring such different skills and experience and personalities to it, right? It's like a gorgeous mishmash of people working together to deliver the trans history lesson that we never had, but one that we so desperately need, especially right now.
Yes, yes. And I love it because, as we'll probably no doubt talk about, I am a huge nerd. So me actually digging through archives and books and websites and finding out and talking to real people through their experiences, it is just really a joy for me to be able to bring these stories to other people. So many times we have been completely erased from our own histories, and we've just been actively not taught about so many trans people. And there is just a wealth of information out there that it is really exciting when I start researching.
Absolutely. For those listening, Gray is the research lead for Trans History Week. And last year you produced the workbook pretty much as kind of a bit of a solo effort, right? You did all the research.
Yeah.
And this year, a big shift in terms of working with other people to shine a spotlight on those untold stories.
Yeah. No, this year it was such a different experience. And I think that the workbook is so much better for it because last year it was just my voice, and I had to acknowledge the limitations of me as an individual person and the experiences and privileges that I walk around with all the time would be very different to some of the people that I would be writing about. And so this year it was really about bringing in other voices, people from other communities, all telling stories that were important to them, whether it was part of their lived experience or just something that they were really passionate about. It was so cool.
Yeah. It is very cool, and it's amazing to see all the different elements of Trans History Week coming to life, and we've got tons of exciting things coming up as we veer towards May 5th to the 11th. Put it in your date, people, and download the workbook.
Absolutely. Yes, come tell my little minions how good they did.
They really did. Great. I want to stay on the theme of kind of transness and but go back to that question of what does the world look like for you right now? We've spoken about it before, as you mentioned the Community Building 101 session. Um, and we spoke a lot about the current landscape, societal media, political landscape for trans and non-binary, gender non-conforming folk. And when I ask what does the world look like for right now, you're also carrying the intersection of being from the US, where things are incredibly difficult right now. How are you taking care of yourself?
It is hard. I'm having to step back from a lot of things that I normally would be going full speed into. I'm having really frank conversations with my children about things. They've just gotten to the age where they can kind of draw conclusions between events and they can see the damage that's being done. And they can also see that they are safe and loved in their home and in their community. We live in Wales right now, and they just have a really inclusive school, and they've got really beautiful supportive people in their lives, and I am sitting there trying to have these conversations with them, but also take care of myself and not just stay entirely invested in the political climate, because it is very easy to sort of um, oversaturate yourself with the news, and everything becomes more of a panic, more of a reaction than an action. And I want to make sure that when I put my energies into something, it is an action, not a reaction. Um, so yeah, talking to people who are back home in the States. I grew up in the deep South, so it's particularly a kind of rough place right now. I'm just trying to hear people, support them as much as I can without giving too much of myself.
So bringing it back to the work you're doing now, it must be really to find a community and to be having the impact that you're having with Trans History Week must be a real almost beacon of hope and energy at what is quite a relentless, challenging time.
Yeah, and I feel like the work that we do with Trans History Week is so important because part of the narrative of transphobia right now is that it is new, that it's a
Mm.
fad, it's a social contagion, it's been called, and it's an internet phenomena. And what we're able to say is actually we existed long before any of that stuff. And when we can actually point to real research, real documents, have those citations, come ready for the conversation, it's really hard for somebody to just turn around and say, "No, I still think you're new."
It's long been proven that trans lives and queer lives generally have been, as you said earlier, written out of history, had history retold, and massively and our impact overlooked. And I just think that in order to do that, we need to come together as a community, and we're seeing more and more pushback. And I think that particularly when we think about, the rhetoric around DEI being dead and such, all of this feeds in together, and it goes to show that with solidarity amongst the LGBTQ plus community within the LGBTQ plus community has never been more important than now.
Absolutely. And that is underlying everything that we do in Trans History Week because we have the four lessons that we focus the workbook and a lot of our media stuff around, which is we've always been here, tick, we can't be erased. They may try, but they've not managed to do that. We are stronger together, like you were just saying, having queerness come together as a community and work together. And we're more than trans. Like some people want to say that this is our entire personality because this is the work that we do, but we are so multifaceted, and being able to show that we can actually be really successful and really creative in other realms just makes us stronger. Just being able to recognize that makes it so much better.
I think that final lesson is something that is so often overlooked, right? When it comes to identities. And I'm not just talking about trans and queer identities, but identities of disabled people, black people, POC, right? We are so often whittled down to stats and
Yeah.
numbers and headlines and barriers and challenges. But actually, a lot of conversations on here and ones that we have in kind of diversity, equity, inclusion, it's like actually life can be pretty normal and mundane
Yeah.
most of the time. And you must
Yeah.
feel that, right?
Absolutely. I've got two kids, so a huge amount of my day is, getting them up, getting them to school, getting them home, their extracurriculars. What are we having for dinner? All those sort of things. There are complete days where nothing actually involves my transness except for the fact that I am present.
Yeah. What would when you think about that lesson more than trans, what's another thing that you'd just like to throw out that people might not know about you?
Oh God, that's really hard, actually. I think what I want to say is I'm boring.
You are far from boring.
No, but I guess I've had sort of different stages of like professional life.
Yeah.
I was a lecturer for 15 years in English literature and writing. I once worked in entertainment media. I Yeah, I guess I've just had these different realms that I've existed in. Right now, I work in like tax relief and arts funding, which is so far different than other things that I've done before. But it's just yeah, I've had these different arcs, I guess, that you can follow in my life.
I love that. Yeah, it just goes to show that people are so multi-layered, multifaceted. Like for me, I do like to inject my queerness into things, right? Certainly into kind of projects like Trans History Week and this
Mm,
podcast, but also in other areas of my life. But there are also times where I like to think actually I'm not just that. I can talk about
yeah,
other things. I do have other interests and passions, but
yeah.
I think we can pigeonhole ourselves a little bit sometimes.
Absolutely. And yeah, a lot of the conversations that I have around Trans History Week are specifically about being trans. But then actually, if I step back, sometimes it's about other people's transness. And it
Mm,
just happens to be that I am a trans person talking about their existence or their history. Yeah, it's inconsequential except for that I feel the power of doing it. It doesn't actually matter to the people I'm telling it to or about.
absolutely. I know we're going to talk about your origin story, but in terms of the way you pulled these lessons together, had you all, and I know you're a self-described nerd, right? Have you always been a history buff?
A little bit. I think that it was around literature a lot of the times before. My dad was an English teacher when I was growing up, so it kind of like fell in my lap in that way, although I never intended to do that as a career. Um, but I think, when it came to reading old books and things like that, one of the most important things was to put them in context. So I often learned about the history in order to understand the book more. And so I found that a lot of my, especially like in the UK, like English history came from reading Shakespeare and Johnson and and all these sort of things. That is how my history knowledge was situated. But then at some point it just became, oh, I love a rabbit hole.
Yeah, fair. A good old deep dive.
Yeah.
Um, England is home, right, for you?
Wales, but the UK,
The
yeah,
UK,
yeah.
yeah.
I've been here 14 and a half years. No, 15 years. Yeah. So I've been here for a long time, the majority of my adult life. It's where my kids know, it's where their home is. So yeah, I'm UK.
Fair, fair, fair. Well, hopefully things will improve here, but also improve across the pond.
Yeah. I would like to be able to go back and visit people. And right now that just isn't an option. It's for a long time it's not felt safe, but on top of that, it's not legal right now
Yeah.
because my passport is correct. I can't actually enter the US on my passport. Um, so
Yeah, it's,
yeah,
it's rough.
I hope that it gets to a place where, we can actually go back and see people because I mean, I did spend a lot of my life there and, I have people that I know and love and things that I would still like to see in the States that I never did. Um, so yeah, I hope things get better for people who are living there and for people who want to travel there. Some people are stuck and it's really hard because I want to say get up and move, but that's such a privileged idea of that anybody could just get up and move.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into your origin story, just want to take a moment and say, what would you encourage people to do in terms of taking action right now, whether people from within the queer trans community and allies, what would you want to say to them right now?
Well, one thing I think is that not to just toot our own horn about Trans History Week, but I do think that people can take a lot of the information that we have researched, that we have provided, and just sharing that information. Because if you don't know the history, it is very easy to buy into the rhetoric. Like, oh, we see so many more trans people now. Well, we have a global media because so we see a lot of different types of people now than we did before. And, when there's these dangerous lies that are being spread around about people who are queer, whether it's trans or not, and and a lot of different communities, literally putting that information out there and saying, "This is true, this is real lives." I think that can really embolden people. I think it can make them feel better situated within their communities and their lives, and I hate the old cliches, but if one person changed their mind because of what they told, it actually could be quite powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Get downloading that workbook, people.
Yes.
Another shameless plug. Great. I'm so looking forward to diving into your origin story. Are you ready to pause and rewind?
Yes, let's do it.
Here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about Little Grey.
Little Gray was just as much of a nerd as Big Gray is. Um, I used to really love reading and writing from such a young age. I learned to read very, very young. Now looking back, it's probably because I'm autistic. I just decided I wanted to learn one day, and I did. Um, but I was an only child. We lived out in the middle of nowhere in the rural South, and so my existence was very solitary for a long time. So that's where I found a lot of friends and adventure and stuff was just in books. And then the other side of my life was that I had a really big extended family, some of whom were not actually related by, blood or anything. But it was holidays and big events were always huge family things. And so I had this sense of myself being so solitary. And then I was like a little island in the middle of this bigger family. So it was very easy for me to feel either the center of attention or completely ignored because I was the littlest one for 8 years of my entire extended family. And then all of a sudden the other kids started being born, and suddenly I was the oldest of the kids rather than the youngest of everyone.
Do you have are there lots of happy memories of growing up in a big family?
I do have a lot of happy memories about it. One of the things is it's one of my aunts. Her birthday is in July, and one year she was asked what she wanted to do for her birthday, and she said build a snowman.
Okay.
Well, especially deep south of America. I mean, there's not a lot of places where you could build a snowman in July, but what happened was is my grandmother actually worked for a man who had an ice packing company. And so they had ice shavings, like chipped ice and everything. So they would come and bring a truck full of snow and dump it on my grandmother's front lawn every July, and we would build snowman. We had our Christmas in July, is what we called it. But so there's these great pictures of like wearing bathing suits or like shorts and short sleeves and building a snowman in the front yard.
That's super cute. That's super cute. I always think a Christmas party in the summer would be great, and you've done it.
Yep.
Here
Yep.
for it. What about some of your maybe earliest memories or a favorite anecdote or two that you've heard about yourself growing up?
One that I can't actually remember, but that was always told about me growing up, and it fits right in with what I'm doing throughout my life, is that I um, I was about 4 or 5 years old, and we were at my grandmother's house, and I seemed to have just gone missing. And people were like, "Oh my God, where are they? Where are they?" And they found me hiding under the dining table, and it had this big, long tablecloth that went around it. It was this huge round table. Um, and I was hiding under there with a torch and an encyclopedia. And the reason I was hiding and when they were calling for me, I wasn't coming out, is because I was afraid I was going to get in trouble for reading a grown-up book, the encyclopedia. Um, and so at that point, it was just like that was one of those things that, has always stuck with me, even though I can't actually remember it, is that I always wanted to learn, even if it meant I got in trouble.
There, and you carried that through.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you see that in
And
your kids? Do you see that in your kids now?
they don't hide it, but they do sit and learn, and they get very invested in specific things. My son is a lot like me as far as like academically, the kinds of things that he enjoys. In fact, I told him about. I told him after the fact, actually, that when I was his age, I decided I was going to read all of Shakespeare's plays by the time I was 10. Now, of course, that didn't mean understand. We're not saying
Yeah,
reading
yeah.
comprehension was where I could read Shakespeare's plays and really know what was going on. But it was a goal that I had in mind, and I did it. I read them all by the time I was 10. Um, and he is currently reading like these kids versions basically of Shakespeare's plays. So he's got like 25 short novels of Shakespeare plays that have been, made more appropriate and understandable for kids. And I just look at that and I was like, that's exactly what I was doing at your age. Only he has a more approachable and manageable way of getting it done. But so he started, building connections between things. The other day he was like, do you know, I have a fact about the Lion King. And I was like, can't wait to hear this. Um, and his fact was that it was at least somewhat based on Hamlet. And it
Oh,
was just like, he was like, so there's the dad that dies, and then the uncle's trying to take over, and this and all this sort of stuff. And he really was able to draw those kind of conclusions, which is amazing to me. My daughter is really, really into like arts and crafts stuff, which is another passion of mine. Um, and so she's able to come up with ideas and then see them into fruition or ask for help with them. So sometimes I sew her clothes based on designs that she's made. And yeah, it's just they just have such curiosity and such depth of understanding that it's amazing to think, oh, maybe was I like that? I don't know. Maybe people looked at me and saw that same thing when I was a kid, you know.
it must be, it's like so surreal to see little mini versions of you
Oh,
kind of
especially my
growing.
son is a clone. Like it's just I took the face and copy pasted it onto a little one.
I love that. And back to anecdotes. Sorry,
Yeah.
got
No.
sidetracked.
Yeah, yeah. And this one is really interesting now to look back and see like whether there was a transness element to it or not. I remember the event. I don't remember all the things that led into it necessarily, but it was my third birthday, and the only thing that I really wanted was a pair of shoes just like my dad's. And he had these really brown 80s boat boat shoes, called them Docksiders. And I just was so in love with them, so in love with them. And I was just like, I want a pair. That's what I want for my birthday. That's what I want. And I got them. I was given them. And it's so funny to look at the picture because there's one picture of me holding the shoes. And I've always had really big feet. So it looks like those couldn't possibly be for me. And there was a play school kitchen that was still like in its big box and everything. That was obviously the big present that I had gotten, but I just wanted those shoes and I loved them so much. Um, so yeah, there was a great little memory of getting those to be just like my dad.
Oh, I love that. I feel like we need that picture to accompany this episode
I
to
can
sum
give it
up
to
your
you. Yeah.
grade. I'm here
I
for
don't
it.
have a lot of pictures from my childhood, partly because I moved, partly because of family strains, things like that, partly because they weren't digital.
Mm, yeah.
But I do have a few of them, and that's one of them that I've got. Yeah.
Well, I need to see this. Um, take me back to school. What were you like at school? What was that experience like?
I was always, as they refer to it, as academically gifted,
Okay.
but my social skills were not very good. And when I first started school, um, I I would get very bored very quickly because, I started kindergarten, which is like reception here. Um, and I already knew how to read and write. I already knew how to do those things pretty well as well. Um, and so I would just write down a couple of things, hand it back, and then get bored. And so I did, things that were not necessarily on task to get over the boredom. What they ended up doing with me was they put me in a kindergarten class and a first grade class at the same time. And so
Okay.
they would give me my work in one class. I would do it, I would turn it in, and I would run down the hall to the other classroom. But so that kept me interested because I was doing more work and a higher level at one point, but it didn't exactly ingratiate me to any of my peers.
Mm,
I was that weird kid that was there about half the time.
yeah.
And, oh, did I think I was too good for kindergarten? And what was I doing so young in first grade? Those kind of things. And I always had this sense of needing to be right.
Okay.
And again, this is probably autism coming up strongly.
I was about to say, is this an element of neurodivergence coming through?
Yeah, yeah, it probably is. But what I didn't know was that not everybody had that same desire to be
Mm,
right and to make sure that things were correct. So if they got something wrong, they didn't necessarily want to be corrected, like
okay.
the teachers. And
Yep.
my thought was that, oh, if I tell you this, then you know, and then you can tell other kids the right stuff. I was like, I'm doing you a service. And they're saying, you are going to the office. Yeah.
Had you had a diagnosis at that point?
No, no. In fact, probably if I had been tested as a kid, I probably wouldn't have actually come up on the criteria because we know so much more about neurodivergence
Mm,
now than then. And like the kids at school who had autism diagnoses were the kids who couldn't hang in mainstream classes.
right.
And so they were in their own part of the school, and you saw them in the hallway. A lot of times they were non-speaking or things like that where it was much more severe their impact of being in school was going to have on them, whereas me, I was very anxious and I had this desire to be right and I had to meet all these criteria that I had set for myself and all those things that now we can see are parts of autism, but they wouldn't have been recognized at the time.
Yeah. Um, did you feel different to other kids in terms of kind of, those recognizing those behaviors and those ways of being around other people? And what was your sense of self like within that?
um, I knew I always felt different. I didn't know
Mm,
why.
yeah.
And part of it was that, I guess probably because I had read so many books, I
Mm.
was telling the story of my life in my head as I was experiencing it. So there was this like running narrative. Um, and it included things like being on the playground. And if nobody was actually playing with me, I started writing like a sad song or a sad poem about my loneliness when I could have just gotten up and gotten on the swings with the other kids. So, I set myself out um, by also feeling out. So it's
Mm.
hard to know which one of those things came first, but I certainly didn't do myself any favors in that regard. Um, Also, because I was so advanced in reading and writing skills, I often got set aside from the other kids. So we would have like reading competitions. I think they were called like accelerated reader stuff, and you
Mm.
could bank these points and you could get, like kids would get a bike if they were one of like the main readers in school. And I just wasn't allowed to participate because
Oh,
they thought it wasn't fair being on such a high level of reading that it meant that I would either read the books that the other kids were reading and just blow through them, or I would be reading books at such a high level that they would be worth so many points that it wasn't fair to the other kids. And so instead of finding a way for me to be able to participate in a way that would feel fair, they just didn't let me.
which is so warped when you think about now, when we think about achievements like that and that term gifted, um, that takes exclusion to a whole other realm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I felt that from my peers a lot of the times that I felt
Mm,
excluded. And then I was being told by the teachers that I couldn't take part in things. And again, I was younger than everybody because after I did that kindergarten and first year grade together, I went into second grade. So I
yeah,
stayed with the older kids. And so I was a year younger. So there was this real feeling of I was too young to be there. I was too good a reader. I was always too much of
yeah,
something.
yeah.
And I think that I also had that feeling in myself of being too much, that I had to bring myself back. And if I didn't pull myself in, then I was never going to actually belong anywhere.
Yeah.
There were things like I didn't feel particularly understood by my mother. She wanted to have a bunch of kids. She had
Yeah.
enough energy and maternal instinct and all that sort of stuff in order to have a bunch of kids. And I was an only child.
Yeah.
And I think, I was a lot like my dad. I was a lot like my dad growing up. And she just didn't see that as a kid that she could really connect with. And it's not that she didn't try, but I was foreign in that way.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of times where I probably excluded myself and times where other people excluded me, and I just felt really outside of everything.
The way I'm interpreting this is you had the a lot clearly gifted intelligence there, but perhaps not the emotional
Yeah.
maturity to balance those two demands. And there, never mind being right. My thing has always been fairness, right? I've
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
needed things to be fair. It just feels very unfair because that people were seeing the intelligence, but not seeing the lack of maturity to be able to for
Right.
someone to be able to cope in that situation.
Yeah, and that's where my son is at school right now.
Right.
Because he's about probably a year and a half um, behind the other kids in emotional maturity, but he is so far ahead when it comes
Yeah.
to a lot of the things he loves to learn and read about and that kind of stuff. And what they've really done with him, which is amazing, he is diagnosed autistic now. Is we sat down at one point developing the learning plan, and I told his teachers, I was like, no, please don't take this the wrong way. I don't care if you don't teach him anything else academically this whole year. I was like,
Mm.
he's going to learn. He's going to learn what he needs to. He's going to learn what he wants to. I said, but if we can find situations to help him on the emotional maturity, the social level,
Yeah.
those things. So they've been great with him that he's been able to be kind of like a peer helper. And
Yeah.
sometimes, so if a kid is having trouble with spellings or with maths or things, he is allowed to go and like help them out. And it gives him a purpose in it. And it gives him a way of actually interacting with other kids um, in a way that is socially appropriate and can build those skills with him. So that's what, and it's funny that you said that your thing has been fairness because that's his as well. He wants fairness. And it's taken a long time, as far as like for a little kid, especially to understand what that meant, because
Mm.
fairness isn't always what you feel is right.
Yeah.
And as a kid, it's like, well, if I didn't win, that wasn't fair.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he was at a rugby game the other day, and there was a try disallowed, and he was like, "That wasn't fair. They scored the try," and it was like, "Well, it wasn't an actual try based on the rules, even though he crossed the line." And trying to bring that back home for him at the fairness and equality side of it, he's like, "Well, if they scored a try, they should have a try."
Yeah. I think it's so beautiful the way that you're harnessing your own experience and being able to bring that into the way that your kids are raised and
Yeah,
tutored and brought into the world. I want to just tap into this concept of too much because so many of us in society are often labeled with that term too much, whether it's queerness, transness, feminine, whatever. Have you accepted your too muchness?
I think that I have. I'm still definitely on that journey.
Mm,
I know that knowing myself as a man, as a trans man, means that there are some aspects of me that are always going to be a bit feminine. But I
mm,
am queer on top of being trans.
yeah.
And so, there are ways in which that was more acceptable, for a gay or bi man to be more feminine. And being able to like lean into those places where I had consciously pulled back before.
Mm,
Um, I definitely have or feel like I have that main character energy. And
love.
it's very different when you think it, you changed it from the belle of the ball to the man about town. Those are very different characters. And I always felt like I was putting on things, like whether I would say I was putting on my girl clothes to go out, or my people face, or those things, which are talking about masking. They're talking about both like neurotypical masking, and heteronormative masking, being able to walk out of the house and say, "Oh no, I am this kind of person," and you can see that by the way that I am dressed and the way I carry myself. And when you feel like you have main character energy, it often means you think that people are looking at you even when they're not.
Very true. Very true.
So, there were things where it was like, I have to make sure that all the things line up. And so one of the ways that I experienced a lot of dysphoria that I didn't know until well after the fact that it was like picking up my son from nursery. And so I would go, and for some reason in my head, I would say, what if they don't think that you're his mom?
Okay.
And, so there was this feeling of like, well, why would that be? And I would try to take off the things. It was like, well, I am old enough to have a kid. So that works in my favor. I actually dropped him off this morning, so they've seen me. They know who his parents are because I've been there all the time, and it started going like down this list, and it was like the only thing that made sense in hindsight was that the reason I wasn't his mom, or I could be seen as not his mom, was because I wasn't actually a woman.
Mm.
And nobody had that experience except me, and so I was the one who found the place where, oh, where is this incongruence? And it was my gender identity. It was that it did not line up for me. And no matter how many times I tried to like say, oh, I'll tick the box by I'll wear more adult seeming feminine clothes, then I can look like a mom. Who decides what a mom looks like anyway?
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it was always very consciously masking in some way, whether it was the neurodivergence to try to seem like, oh, I didn't have a problem making eye contact today, or it was I was perceived as a woman when I left the house, and
Mm.
you know, those kinds of things were about finding a way to address the discomfort in the
Yeah.
existence and the identity that I found myself situated in. And at the end of the day, it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, that is where I had to find the answers, I guess. If we're looking at the character arc of the main character,
Yeah.
we're at the building point where things are about to fall apart.
Absolutely. Let's tap into teenage years because, equally a very formative time. And I know we spoke before recording this around this being a challenging time for you, particularly. And just to put a trigger warning for anyone out there, we're going to talk about conversion therapy during this segment. But talk to me about teenage grey and the moments that led up to that.
Um, So I spent my middle school years, so about from 10 to 13, being homeschooled by my mother in the middle of nowhere, um, very, very isolated. And so one of the only ways that I had connections with people was online.
Hmm.
And then we moved to a new town right as I was starting high school. Again, I was young. I was still 13 at that point, starting school. And it was a very small town, which was very racist, homophobic, um, for lack of a better word, the good old boys club. Like if you were white, male, and wealthy, you had an easier go of it in this particular community because they would have known your family going back generations. So it raised that sort of that that white male privilege to an even larger level. Um, and it was so confusing for me. And it really seemed for a while that they felt like I was some kind of some kind of intrusion, like it challenged their mindsets in different ways. I was very ambitious. I wanted to do things like um, I wanted to be the president of one of the clubs that I was a foundational member of, and I was told it would look better if it was this white boy who, they knew his family all along. He would be a better representative as president of the club, even though he hadn't actually signed up to be president.
Mm.
And so they felt like there was this identity that they had to protect, and all these things that I didn't really fit the mold for. And I so I was young, and I was trying to figure out ways that I could try to try to make a world for myself in that little space. And one of the things that I remember was my dad talked to me about, like when he was in high school, I think early university days too, that he did a lot of acting on
Mm.
stage. And I was like, oh, maybe that's some way I can get around people and I can build a little world for myself here. And there was no drama club, there was no theater teacher, there was a lot of things in this little town that just weren't available. And so I decided, again, like I was main character energy, I'm gonna create a petition. I'm gonna make this happen. I've got a certain number of students from the school. I think it was over 1,000 people signed the petition. I took it to the school board and they hired a drama teacher and they hired a visual arts teacher as well. And I was like, now I'm going to do this. And I put so much of my energy into it. Um, and it was it was a place where I could belong in school, even though I knew that I wasn't being entirely genuine. Like I felt like I was acting before I got on stage.
Yeah.
And so that was just an extension of it, basically, was that, oh, I can act like this person who is acting like this person. And I feel like there were in some ways where I was being more genuine than I had before, but in other ways where I realized I had hid so much of myself that there was no way anybody could have seen me there. And that was a way that I could try on different personalities. And one of the things I actually did was my first time ever wearing a suit, like a men's suit, was on stage. I played a butler, and there was a guy who played like a maid, and so we had just switched the roles, and we had done that, and it was just really interesting to look back and how much I just got so much joy from playing that tiny role and wearing that suit. Like I wanted people to see me in that suit more than I'd wanted them to see me in any other costume I had been in. Another thing was that like at that age, um, God, there's a novel in this, by the way. um, I had realized as well that I was queer, and I didn't
Hmm.
really know what yet
Yeah.
because I didn't have the vocabulary for it.
Yeah.
At that point, I did not know that trans people existed. I did not know that bisexuality existed.
Hmm.
What I knew was that I was, you know, thought I was a girl who was having feelings for girls. So what I thought was that makes me a lesbian because that's the only language that I had for it. Um, and I knew it was not acceptable, and um, I knew that it was something that I was meant to hide because the only people that I knew who were gay before that, it was very clear that they were hiding. It was,
Hmm.
there was a place where, you know, you feel the similarity between two people. You recognize in them, even if you can't see it in yourselves yet, the queerness. And so I was really dealing with that because I knew that where I lived and within my family, it was not an acceptable thing.
Yeah.
And right after I started high school, a friend that I made there invited me to go to a church youth group with her. And again, I was like, is this a place I could belong? I was looking for places that felt really genuine for me. And I went there, and it was the first anniversary of Matthew Shepard's death. And so if you don't, some people might not know about Matthew Shepard, but he was a young gay man who was very brutally murdered. Um, and we may not know 100% why, but it's almost certainly because of his gayness that he was targeted.
Hmm.
Um, and I went there. They were asking if there were any prayer requests, anything that wanted to be acknowledged during the group, and somebody mentioned that it was the anniversary, or yet the day before actually had been the anniversary of his death, the first anniversary. And what was said is one of those things that will never ever leave my mind.
Yeah.
It was that we should remember the Shepherd family, because of the loss that they suffered. Um, we should also lift up the misguided young people who thought that they were doing God's work. And by that, he was saying the people who murdered him, the
Hmm.
people, the people who saw this young man as so offensive and such an affront to their community that they murdered him. And then he said, as well as the other young people who don't realize that they don't have to live in sin and who can live in Christ instead.
Yeah.
And I heard that, and it told me there's a way out of this. That's what I heard. What I was wrong. Even God knew it was wrong, and there was a way out. So I went to up to the youth pastor after that, and I all I could say was, I think I might be gay. Can you help me?
Okay.
And I spent the next about year and a half, 30 minutes twice a week, sitting with that man in his office and being prayed over and praying not to be gay and doing things like wearing elastics on my wrists that I would snap anytime I had specific thoughts, having journaling, which I guess now we would talk about it as like manifesting, that I was not gay, that I was write this out until I believed it, until it happened. And one thing I can absolutely say is that I could have been preyed on, Prey, preyed on a lot worse than I was. But one of the things I actually take on board now is you don't have to be thankful it wasn't worse than it was.
Mm.
So I can say what I experienced was horrendous. It was soul shattering, and other people had worse experiences than me. Um, at the end of the day, he ended up leaving the church, moving to another church, and it just stopped. I don't know if it was because he didn't tell other people that it was going on, or if nobody cared, or if just nobody in the role to step up to do it. But I recognized that I had been there for so long and I had hated myself so much because of it that there was really a rift there between me and the potential of a loving God. I did not come out of it any less gay.
No. Of course.
Of
Of
course.
course.
Yeah. But like recognizing the self-hatred that not only did I go through that experience, but I put myself in it because the culture and the community around me told me that I was so wrong
Yeah.
that I had to try to fix myself before somebody could love me.
Yeah. Did
I was
any
I was 13.
you were 13. Did anyone else know that you were having these appointments?
No. What I did was I also joined the youth group
Hmm.
band,
Yeah.
and I basically I told people that we had to practice at this certain time, like before the youth group meeting and after, when really it was only after.
Yeah.
And so I went and I had these meetings. Yeah.
I imagine that on top of the confusion and the self-loathing that you went through, that it's probably shrouded in secrecy and the shame and having to hide, already feeling like you were
Yeah.
already having to hide stuff. If you don't mind me asking, what has healing from that looked like as you've understood those experiences and reflected and knowing what you know now around conversion therapy and your own sense of
Yeah.
identity? And of course, it didn't change anything. What has healing looked like for you?
Well, I didn't tell anyone about it
Mm,
for 20 years. I just did not. It was not part of my story. It was something that I just skipped over. And it really stood in the way of me trying to find my place in religion, because I always had a very strong sense that there was something, some higher power, something out there, and I didn't know what it was because what I knew was what I had been shown was not loving and was not a place where I could belong. So
yeah.
if it was loving, it was loving for people who weren't me.
Mm,
And I couldn't accept that there was, a God who could not love me. What I could accept was there was a God who could love me but not like me,
Mm.
because I often felt that way in a lot of relationships. I felt like, like my parents, I know that they loved me fiercely.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they ever really liked me, and but that dominated a lot of the relationships in my life, was that feeling of being loved but not liked. And so that meant that there was a wrongness in me, because the things that you may not like about a person are things they could change if they wanted, if it was right for them to change. And so then it was like, what can I do to change me so that you like me? And that was never an acceptance that I could find, because I changed myself and I still didn't like me, you know.
It's heavy. It's heavy for someone at that age to go through.
Yeah, and I just didn't process it until a few, like, recent years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's come on to recent years in a bit. I'd love to know what happens next for you, having been through that, gone through the school system. What happens next for Gray?
Um, well, what I knew about myself when figuring out that queerness element of who I was and what I was that I fell in love with my best friend.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, that's, movie trope sort of thing. And of course, we moved away from each other. We both moved, in fact. So it's like 9 hours distance between us. You got to remember, in the States, everything's bigger, you know. So and that was first love. That was first everything. It was first heartbreak. It was first, how do I figure out how to tell anybody about this? And there was an aspect of it where, in my last year or so in high school, I was kind of out to some people, but not my family, not, that kind
Mm.
of thing. And it was juggling it, trying to figure out how I could juggle it. And I always thought, I'm going to get out of here and then I'll be able to live the way that I want to. So I was like, I'm going to run away to California, or I'm going to move to Canada, or, these things where I felt like people would be more understanding, that idealistic, I'm a big fish in a little pond kind of attitude. But I had to see myself as having a future somewhere,
Mm.
and I knew I it wasn't sustainable to live that life of being either not out or half out,
Yeah.
and try to be around the same people all the time. So what I actually did was not run away to any of those places. When I was 17, I graduated high school and I moved to Atlanta, which is much more, I mean, it's, still in the South, but it's a much more progressive area. They had, like, they had a Pride, which I had never been to before. I didn't really know it existed. I learned about trans people for the first time. I did know about bisexuality at this point. But it was just, like, actually encountering these things. And, if you could say that I was able to sort of find my path because I was exposed to things, which
Mm.
is where that idea of the social contagion comes from. Because if you don't know it exists, you can't be one. Well, I
Yeah.
didn't know I was trans because I didn't know trans people existed. That still meant that I am who I am inside. I just didn't have the language for it. And well, what I learned when I got there was that I was not special. And that's a great thing to learn, but it is a harsh truth to take on
Yeah.
board. Is I may have been a big fish. I may have been a major player in the little towns that I lived in. I was not once I got there. I went to school for architecture.
Yeah.
I knew I was going to be like a world famous architect because that was the only option. It was excellence or nothing. Um, when I got to university is also when I experienced failure, like real failure for the first time. I failed classes. I was not actually very good at architecture. I was good at, like, coming up with ideas on how I wanted a house to look and what was
Mm.
the best use of space. And what I was really, really good was drafting, which is when you're actually drawing with the little lines and everything is so exact and all the little details I could do. Hi, autism.
Yeah.
Seeing that come out. But I wasn't really good at the big picture of it, which I expected would just come with training. And I had to readjust. Basically, I had to refigure out what my life was going to look like because I was 17 and I wasn't good at the thing I decided I was going to do since I was 7.
So where did you land on?
I had some really incredible classes. Basically, before I left, I went to Georgia Tech, which is a huge engineering, architect, science, math school. Um, Before I left, I was like, okay, I'm just going to give it like one more semester, see where I land, see if I'm ready to join back in architecture, and this kind of thing with like renewed passion. So I was taking some humanities electives and things. So I had some English classes and I had one that was called performance studies. And it really, like, I thought it was going to be about performances specifically, like theater sort of stuff. And what it was about the way that, yes, that is an aspect of it, but also how do we perform in daily life? What do we mean when we're saying we're doing certain things? Like, even to the point of like, what is the difference between a ceremony and a ritual? And, like one signifies something, one actually makes a change. And learning those sort of things was incredibly interesting to me. And it also gave me language to start talking about masking. Now, I didn't know that that's what I was doing necessarily, but it gave me that sort of language to start looking for it in books and looking for it in movies and things. And I started really researching um, the way that authors and characters in books would be using masks and sometimes explicitly. And so one of the things that I got really into was William Butler Yeats. He talks a lot about masks and he talks a lot about, taking on these figures. He was an Irish poet, of like really other important Irish people and how he could be those people or how he thought that they were really behind their masks and all of that stuff. And it just drove home to me. I was like, I am not an architect. The way that I actually worded it for a lot of people was I was like, I'm not actually making buildings. Now I'm building things with words.
Amazing. I mean, that's a beautiful reframing and flexing there.
Yeah. And I think I had to do that for myself to accept it as well. Is
Yeah.
I had to find a link there to allow me to make that change.
Yes. And maintain that main
Um,
character energy as well.
yeah. I was like, this is a decision that I have made.
That's quite
It's not because
empowering.
I failed class.
Yeah, that's quite an empowering thing to do.
Yeah, and so it is very much the main character energy. It's this is the new chapter. Let's move on, kind of thing. And this is going to be how we're going to talk about life from now. Unfortunately, as I was finding that kind of power, I was also losing a lot of my power. And this is another place where might want to have a little bit of a trigger warning. I ended up in a coercive, abusive relationship. And so what it amounted to was it started because I got really ill. It was probably part of burnout when I got to university, feeling overwhelmed, feeling not in the right space,
Mm.
feeling very, very wrong. And then I got sick. And um, healthcare at that point, the university healthcare was not fabulous. And what they did was a lot of times it was if you are in pain, here are a lot of pills.
Okay.
And so when you're talking about, you know, addiction, how does it come from? For a lot of people, who are addicted to things like opioids, it's because they were given them by a doctor. And as part of that, I had somebody in my life who um, I thought was a friend and was offering to try to help take care of me, basically. And what that turned into was a very abusive relationship where I lost control of my life and my story and spent a long time in survival mode. So right at the point at which um I could have like reclaimed my story. I could have, set off in this new freedom that I had. Instead, it was just burnt down.
Mm.
And so everything that I knew, including like, my relationship, including like friendships that I had back home, from school and stuff, friendships that I had in university that I had built, a lot of that stuff just was gone. It was gone. I wasn't allowed to have conversations with some of these people, or the conversations were being had on my behalf
Yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff. So right at the point at which I think that I could have potentially flown, my wings were clipped instead. And that very much pervaded the rest of like my university career, was trying to make decisions that were about finding my way, um, within a narrow box that I could operate.
Yeah.
And I also didn't talk about what happened in that situation, which turned into a relationship. I don't know at what point, because I was I was not experiencing significant portions of my life.
Mm.
Um, I didn't talk about what happened within that relationship until I was nearly 30.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't tell anybody. I just kind of went blank on those portions of my life. Or if somebody asked me a question about it, it would be, oh, I had these classes at that time, or I worked this job at that time. And it was never anything about the inner experience that I was having. It was
Yeah.
just about what I did in my day to day. And that eventually, those little gasps to go to do things. Like I signed up to do a study abroad in Germany, and so I did that one summer. Spent time there. I was not allowed to go on my own, but I still was able to prove to myself that I could do things, like
Yeah.
that I was actually strong enough to fly across the ocean and make it through my day, and learn about people and history and places and things like that. And I could survive doing it. And so what it did was it slowly built me up into someone who believed that he could survive.
Hmm.
And so it became a matter of planning my way out from there.
Yeah.
And so I do look at a lot of the experiences I have there as very traumatic, but I still am grateful for them. But again, like you don't have to be grateful that things weren't worse. Like you can accept that things were not healthy, not good, and that you learned and grew from it without saying, I'm glad I went through that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, it's really heavy, but it highlights an important conversation that this narrative of why didn't you just leave? It's really not that simple.
It's not. And especially when there's such a feeling of coercion,
Mm.
to the extent where it's like, oh, you tell your friends you're not going to be there because of X,
Yeah.
and you do it because you are so trained in order to do it, or you fear the consequences of not doing it. And so it's like, why didn't you tell somebody? Well, in the end, when I actually did, they did not believe me,
Yeah.
you know? And there were all these situations where it's like, it's easier to say, for instance, oh, I'm very clumsy, because I am, than to say that I had been physically hurt
Yeah.
by another person intentionally. That's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
And if you're still worried about the repercussions, it's so much easier not to have that conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Great. You mentioned addiction at the beginning of this
Yeah.
question. And so not only do you have the healing that needs to take place from being in a coercive abusive relationship, but you also have addiction to then deal with off the back of that.
Yeah.
What
And
did that look like for you?
um during that abusive relationship, it was used as a way of controlling me as
Mm.
well. Because if I was in pain for whatever purpose, for whatever reason, this was the way out of it.
Yeah.
And it was a way of not running away, it was its own form of running away. And so when I actually stopped altogether using any sort of drugs to mask what was going on, um, I thought that just not using was healing.
Mm.
I thought that reaching a point at which I could say I have X amount of time sober was like the end goal. But what it amounted to was is that I learned, and I learned after 13 years of sobriety,
Yeah.
that it's not the same thing as recovery,
No.
because I had not actually faced any of that stuff. I hadn't faced the conversion therapy that we had talked about. I hadn't faced coming out of that abusive relationship, which again, I didn't tell anybody about. I was facing coming out of the feeling of active addiction and wondering why it still hurt so much when it had been so long. And I ended up in like the 12-step rooms. And the place that I actually found myself was um not necessarily in like AA or NA or anything like that. There's a group called ACA, which is adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And it actually doesn't matter which qualifies you to be in there because they don't ask. But a lot of the same experiences are felt across the membership. And a lot of those people then found other addictions, whether it is through people, whether it is through substances or alcohol or anything like that, and need that healing in a way. And most of what I got out of there was relationships with people who were also committed in the same way, rather than the stuff that I learned in their big books and stuff. It was the community. I was in a queer-centered recovery community, and all of those people had the same background of trauma that was based in their identity. A lot of the people were, like my age or more, who would be looked at as queer elders now, but knew that there were aspects of their life that had been affected by their queerness, whether it was about hiding their identity, whether it was about coming out and not being accepted or loved for who they were, and all these sort of aspects. What we were really recovering from was ourselves. And that is what made the biggest difference of me being able to face these things that I had lived through and actually talk about them, was not recovering from addiction as much as it was recovering from the situations that were either put on me or that I put on myself. And being able to say, yeah, I put myself in those situations, you know, that doesn't mean it was a healthy choice. It doesn't mean that I was like, oh, I'm glad I did that, or I wish that I had stopped before that point. It is, this happened and now I have to deal with it.
Mm.
And I think doing that work, which, like I said, was about talking to people, talking,
Yeah.
really led me to some great healing that I might not have had otherwise. And so I don't know whether it is the actual addiction that is what pushed me into that space, or if it was coming to terms with my identity and who I was and how I wanted to live my life. Um, I like to think that it's where all the things connected
Yeah.
for me. And so my recovery work has been me centered. And even though I've felt my whole life like I had this main character energy, the narrative was about me. It's about what am I going to do next? Um, I never made space for that. I never made space to actually listen to myself. Um, and yeah, I'm so much better for it. because now I look at it and I say, okay, now I've had what, 15 years sober, but 2 years recovery.
Yeah.
And those are very different feelings for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing and being so open and vulnerable within that. Within those those it sounds like there are a lot of lessons learned,
Yeah.
shaped by that experience massively. I'd like to know, do you feel a sense of you're on the right path when it comes to understanding who you are?
Yes, I do. I'm a big believer in things feeling like fate.
Okay.
And I feel like there's a lot of places where I could not have guessed what was going to happen next, but it was like it had to be that. So one of the things that I did was I always joke that I accidentally a leader, you know. I'm an Aries, it's what we do. We step into these situations and we're suddenly very much in charge and we don't know how we got here.
Yeah.
um but so I have been in the forefront of making different groups, a lot of which have not necessarily been successful. But I worked in entertainment media for a while. And so part of that was actually talking to people, doing interviews, writing up these news stories. But it was also traveling and doing social media aspects of it and stuff like that. So I got a really good idea of what made for good social media, um, which then when I decided to leave academia, I was like, oh, I can work in social media. I can work in marketing. I can do this stuff because I've already done it to
Mm.
some extent. I can do that for my job. And I do not. I did not. I fell into other things. But because of that position, it shaped what I applied for when it came to the job hunt and the people that I met. And so I actually worked with someone very briefly who was working in social media, who added me to a WhatsApp group, which was about trans people in marketing and media. And it was, a lot of it was supposed to have to do with marketing talk, and it often did not actually be that. But it was a safe place to talk about those experiences, and there was like a thread of it that was about venting and life questions and things like that. And it became such a beautiful community. And that's where I met Marty Davis, the founder of Trans History Week. And it's like, if I had not followed that path, would I have ended up in this group? Would I have met Marty another
Mm.
way? And on the back of that, when she announced that there was going to be a Trans History Week, that it was, in its infancy, all they had was like the brand, like the the brand, like logos and colors and things already set out. The brand book was there, but nothing else was there. I was like, I need to be here. I need to do something like this. I was like, this is the connection between the things that I have wanted to do and the things that I have done. And a big part of that was that when I came out as trans, I decided to be very public.
Mhm.
Like on my social media and stuff, I didn't take down any of my old photos. I changed my name and I talked very openly about it on social media. I saw myself as a position to educate
Yeah.
because, like I said, if somebody doesn't know about trans experiences, giving them a little bit of education can help them understand. And it's like at the end of the day, if you see trans people as human and deserving of human rights, then that is already a step forward over a lot of people, unfortunately. But so if I talked about my experiences, having known that I was trans, what it means, that it's not a social thing, that it wasn't because somebody told me that I was trans, if I could share those things, then I was doing good work. And so when Marty said, "Oh, I need somebody who's going to do researching stuff," I was like, "This is for me. This
Yeah.
is what my life has led me to." And so I very much feel like I've been able to reaffirm my identity through the research work that I've done. And I've been able to do the research work I've done because of my identity. And so it's not all that I am, but it is a huge factor in everything that I am.
Wow, that's so powerful. I'm going to end this segment with this question off the back of that. Looking back so far, what are you most proud of to date?
That's hard because on one hand, I want to say like my Trans History Week work because I do think it is hugely important
Hmm.
and I have poured so much love and energy into it. And on the other hand, I want to say that like me just being here,
Mm.
me just surviving and then thriving when I have had so many cards stacked against me, even by my own self, that literally living a good life and being a happy person is probably one of the things that I am absolutely most proud of.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Oh, yes. Okay. You just have to tell me that my answers have to be quick fire too.
Here we go. We'll go as quick fire as we can. What
Yes.
album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
Supposed former infatuation junkie, Alanis Morissette. It taught me that poetry and songs don't have to rhyme. That was mind blowing to me.
It is incredible, right?
It is a true journey. And I said that at the time and I was laughed at. And I was like, I just need to write blurbs for things now. That's my job.
Yeah. What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
You are exactly where you are meant to be is one of my favorite things. Because
Yeah.
even if things don't make sense, they might be slotting into place and you just can't see it. And I think that it almost says the same thing, but I find it as an empty platitude. It is what it is.
Oh, yes, it's mine. It's mine. We share it. It's my one for the bin. I fucking hate it. Loads of
It's
people. Yeah.
it is what it is. And I was like, well, does it have to be? Does
Yeah.
it?
No, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, and it reeks of complacency, and yeah, but it's I think this might be the eighth or ninth time it's come up on here, so you're in good you're
Good.
in good
Good.
company, and it's
Maybe we
my
can just delete it from like the community, everybody's vocabulary.
that
Let's
would
just
be
all
nice.
decide.
That would be
Yeah.
great. Yeah, it's definitely one that I had to do a lot of work on to stop saying. What's been the best adventure of your life so far?
Parenthood.
Yeah,
I feel like that's a boring answer for a lot of people to hear,
nah.
but parenthood, because my kids are hilarious. They are the weirdest little creatures, and I love them dearly. They're so funny.
You told me a gorgeous anecdote the other day about your transit and your son's perception of you. Are you happy to share?
Oh, is that when he didn't remember that I was trans?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So we were talking about because he had a question about transphobia actually. And so, I did the whole educational spiel of what transphobia is. And I was like, well, do you know any trans people? And he was like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so." I was like, well, I'm trans, like right here having this conversation with you. And he just looked at me and goes, do you think you're a girl? And it just caught me so much because his understanding of who I was so based around my maleness that he could not fathom me being female.
Yeah. It and it just goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of that mundaneness of life, right? Of the
Yeah.
normality of your life at home with your children.
Like I feel like I'm talking about transness all the time. And clearly that's not the actual
Yeah.
experience of it for people around me necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my kids are so funny. And they just find the weirdest things so interesting. Like right now, for the last, I guess, year or so, my son has been obsessed with ampersands,
Okay.
which is an interesting choice. He found out that the people used to treat it as one of the letters of the alphabet, and it no longer is, obviously. And so he thinks that's unfair, and he wants to try to get it put back into the alphabet. Um, but my kids are also they're not trying to impress me, which is fascinating. I didn't know you could try to not impress people. um, but it's one of those things like if I tell them that I love them, they don't feel like they have to say it back.
Yeah.
Like they could be like, yep, that registered, or, good job, thank you. Or, if they feel like it in the moment, they can tell me they love me too.
Yeah.
And I got a tattoo the other day, actually. It's upside down if I show it like this, but it's an ampersand. And I showed it to my son, and he was like, what is that? And I was like, it's an ampersand. And he just looked at me and he goes, thank you.
That's so adorable. And it's the loving safety that you're creating.
Yeah. And it was just like the idea of like he recognized that by me getting that, it was saying I love you to him in a way.
Yes.
And he saw that it was about him, even though I didn't say, oh, I got this because of you.
Yeah.
Because, and I like ampersands too. I like what they symbolize, but it's improv. It's and yes and
And
next and
yes.
yes
I've
and
I am with your son. I've been told off for using ampersands too much in text, and I won't stop, and I
no,
refuse.
no.
Yeah.
Ampersand
um,
solidarity.
oh, well, here's the parenting.
That was not a quick fire answer. I am sorry.
I'm here for it. What three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Southern Gothic comedy, which is a very book-centered American sort of thing. Um, it won't make sense to a lot of people, I'm sure, but it's very much that even though I don't live in the South, and even though I never really felt truly like included and part of the community there, it pervades my being. There is
Yeah.
just some things. Have you seen the TikTok guy Landon Talks?
Yes.
Yes. So everything that he says is just like my life. I just don't sound like that. And all those things. He's like the way that we talk about people, the way that we talk about your mama, the way that we do all those sort of things. And then my life is sort of the what can go wrong in those areas. And
Yeah.
so the reason why I added the comedy aspect of it is because I very much link it to Shakespeare, comedy of errors. And it's a way of actually recognizing that I can experience things. I can pick fun at myself, and I can say, "Oh, that was a trip, wasn't it?"
Absolutely. We need to tap into that humor, right? Particularly right now.
No. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can go Google Flannery O'Connor if you want to know what Southern Gothic is.
I'm here for it. Right. Southern Gothic comedy. Love. Let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
I am really excited that we are building up to the actual Trans History Week this year,
Yes.
linking it back to the start of our conversation. I am
6 weeks
really
away.
excited.
Six
Yeah,
weeks
yeah,
away. Crazy.
it's so soon. Suddenly it just became right there. But we've recently launched the workbook, and so I'm really excited that hopefully more people will read it when it comes time. I'm excited for the live events. I'm just really, really stoked to see what people do with it this year. Um, yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait.
It's exciting. What brings you joy?
So many things now. So many things. I used to not have a lot of joy in my life, and now I do. Like this shirt, I wear this shirt every day, every year on my birthday. It says age to perfection. I get a stupid amount of joy out of this. I do. I
You've
get
had that
joy from,
shirt since you were 16, right?
yes, yeah. And I wear it on my birthday every year. And also, you see my plants I've got all behind me, and peacocks. Peacocks.
Is that a Lego peacock?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I know that you're a plant queer.
Yep, yep. I have Lego plant too, just to drive it
I
home.
love it.
Yep. So my plants my kids, my family, my shirt, my Lego, everything. So many things bring me joy now. And I'm so grateful for it because I could oversaturate in the news. And instead, I find the pockets of brightness. And I have not always been that way. So I'm really grateful for it.
So beautiful. My final question for you, Gray, is this.
Okay.
Do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
I'm going to echo actually the webinar that we did last week. In if you have something to offer, offer it. And if you need someone to offer something, ask for it. Because, I get so much joy out of the Trans History Week work that I do. And if I hadn't said, Marty, I want to do it, I have capacity and I have research skills, then I wouldn't have this beacon of joy in my life. And it only really came to fruition this year because I needed help and I asked for it. And that is something that clearly, by lots of the stories I've told you about, I have not done all throughout my life. But like I said, doing the petition for the drama club at school, I had something to offer, so I offered it. When I needed help, I asked for it. And that has gotten me in quite good stead.
It's a
It's
practice,
a
though.
it is. It absolutely is because
Mhm.
I can overextend myself a lot. I can
Yeah.
burn out very easily. And that is the hard part of being able to step back and say, because I can offer myself up all day long.
Yeah.
It's being able to step back and say, I actually can't do that right now. It is very hard. It goes against how I was raised and how I understood myself in any kind of relationship, professional, personal, anything. But learning to ask for help and beautiful things can come out of it. Beautiful things, things so much bigger than I could have done on my own.
Wow, what a note to end on. Great. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Happy
Thank
birthday.
you. Thank you.
The top age to perfection.
Right?
Keep
Right?
wearing it.
Every year until it falls off my
Every year.
body.
I can't wait to see you soon. Take care.
Yes. Thank you so much, Neil.
What a conversation. I am so grateful for the way that Gray just shared everything. And, his story is one of resilience and strength, and one that's certainly not without challenges and trauma. And Gray and I spoke before the podcast around that, around kind of the level of trauma bringing in, and didn't want it to just be one big trauma dump. And I think sometimes conversations can feel like that, but certainly what I'm taking away is that Gray isn't so much grateful for those experiences. He very much clearly said, when we go through something like that, we should not have to feel grateful that it was worse. But really, Gray really recognizes the way that those experiences have shaped him and informed who he is today and how he shows up, particularly in the work that he's doing with Trans History Week and the work that he's done himself. And the way that he parents. Gray and I had a conversation following the podcast recording around religion. I asked how Gray felt about it, and Gray went on to elaborate how he has found a super inclusive church in Bristol. And so, that's something that when you have a quite traumatic link to religion, past experiences, and as Gray experience with conversion therapy, but also my own experience. I didn't have a great experience of religion myself. But how Gray has been able to find that sense of belonging and hope in an inclusive church that accepts him and his family. And there's something really beautiful in that as well. It's understandable when people go to a level of detachment from it, but actually Gray has chosen to move past that. And we had a conversation about that we'll leave with that conversation, but just wanted to share that. Gray chooses joy. And that can be something that is really difficult sometimes to access for trans and non-binary folk at the moment with, everything that's going on. And trans visibility comes at a cost to so many people. It's not easy being trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, or queer these days. So hearing Gray talk about the way he chooses joy and very much recognizes that that's a privilege, but joy in parenthood, joy in what he does, and just what a brilliant conversation. Gray, you are an amazing human. I'm so grateful that I get to work and be in your company. So yeah, thank you for being you. Thank you for listening. Please do check out Trans History Week. Give them a follow on LinkedIn, Instagram. Sign up to Queer AF for all of your Trans History Week news and updates. Join us from the 5th to 11th of May, where we've got events going on. There'll be tons of content. Stay tuned for that. And join me next month on the 16th of April, where I'll be chatting to Shah Bailey for our first Pause and Rewind live podcast recording. But thanks so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, help bring these conversations to a wider audience. They deserve to be heard. And stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. Cheers.